hello, Courier Nation. Welcome to the Deliver on Your Business podcast, where you are the boss. Each week, we talk about how to make the most of your business as an independent contractor, as a courier delivering for gig economy apps like Grubhub, Doordash, Postmates, Ubereats, and so many others. Well, welcome back for another week, Courier Nation. It's good to have you back once again. Before I dive into today's episode, I want to ask you, do you have any experience with Skip the Dishes? It's a Canadian delivery company, and they did serve about 6 United States markets until they pulled out. I believe it was kind of last summer that they pulled out of the United States, and they sold their operations over to Grubhub in those areas. So in particular, I would really love to hear from anybody that might have delivered for them in the United States and then switched over to Grubhub, because I would love to talk to you. I'd love to find out your experiences. I'd love to find out what seems different. You know, what was different, what was better, what was worse. And here's the reason that I'm asking the question. There's been, of course, all the talk lately about Just Eat Takeaway buying Grubhub. And everybody's kind of trying to focus on Just Eat and what kind of company they are. But the reason that I'm curious about Skip the Dishes is Skip the Dishes was bought by Just Eat back in, I think it was 2016. Now, my understanding was there wasn't a whole lot that was changed about how they operated. But because you've got kind of that same ownership and everything like that, I'd be very curious, because I think Skip the Dishes is going to give us a better idea of what Grubhub could be like. And so if you have delivered for Skip, I'd love to hear from you. Click on the contact button on, I've got a bunch of things for contact in the show notes, or email me, ron@entrecourier.com. I would love to hear from you, because I'd like to kind of dig a little more into what that transition was like for people, and to get a better feel for maybe comparing another company that is owned by Just Eat to Grubhub. So that's maybe for a future episode. But today, I want to ask this question. Who is the best delivery app for somebody to get started with? Is it Grubhub? Is it Postmates? Is it Doordash? Is it Ubereats? You know, if you were somebody that's getting ready to dip your toe into being a delivery driver because you want to make some extra money, or maybe you're in the middle of a job hunt and you just need something to earn some money until you get started, who's the best one to get started with? And now I know a lot of you listening are already delivering, so you've got some ideas, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'd like to hear if there are some things that you see that maybe you look at things a little differently than I do, than what I talk about. But even if you're already started, you may be running across people that are interested in doing delivery. And so it's good to think about this type of thing. You know, how's the best way to help somebody get started with deliveries? What would you tell them to do? Now, let me clarify something. My question is not who is the best delivery platform. That's a different question. That's a completely different question. My question is, which one is the best one to get started with? And I think the answer to those questions can be very different. Maybe they turn out to be the same, but for different reasons. But I just, I think it's a different question as to who's the best platform to deliver for than who's the best one to get started. I want to throw out one very important rule, one very important thing that you got to think about as far as doing delivery, and especially for somebody that's getting ready to get started. You've got to understand this one thing. You might hate this. You know what I mean? You know, and there's nothing wrong with it if you do. For a lot of us, I love doing delivery. I've run into a lot of people that it was just, it amazed them how much they enjoyed doing it. And there are other people that, you know what, you get into this and you're dealing with the customers, when you're dealing with the restaurants, you're dealing with the apps, you might just find, you know what, I really hate doing this. And that's okay too. You know, it is a matter of preference. It's a matter of just about anything. There are some people that practice law and they love it. And there are other people that practice law and they feel trapped. You know, they need the money, but they hate doing the work. And it's just like any kind of profession that's out there. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. And the beauty, though, of gig work, and especially of getting started with gig work, though, is this one thing that you don't really have to commit, you know? This is not like a job. There's kind of a level of commitment when you start a job, There's this thing that I think sometimes it has to do with resumes, but I think, there's this thing that you start a job and there's a stigma attached to not sticking to a job. But this is different. When you start a gig like this, it's designed, the idea is really to be kind of a side thing. For a lot of people, it's more than that. But the thing about it is, you can dip your toe in the water and you might find that you hate it. You might dip your toe in the water and find that you like it. But I think that's the beauty of it is you can kind of try it out and you can get a feel for whether you want to go a little further with it or not, or you might find out you don't like it. But I think that that's just an important thing to keep in mind. If somebody wants to get started, if they want to give this a try, is the fact that, yes, you can give it a try. And it's okay to start out and decide you hate it, and then you can move on. But I think that potential that you will hate it is something that you really have to keep in mind. And I think that factors into this whole question of who is better to start with and why it might be better start with one company, but eventually move much more consistently or heavily to a different company. So having said that, I really recommend that you understand one thing when you're evaluating which app is the best to do your first deliveries with. And that one thing is that really, for the most part, they're kind of the same thing. Now, that makes it easy to move from one to the other. Once you get started with one, it makes it easier to pick up with something else. And there are differences, there are nuances, there are different ways that they do things and different procedures and different stuff like that. But when it comes down to just the basics of what you're doing, it's pretty much the same thing. You get an offer that shows up in your app. You accept or reject the offer. If you accept it, then you go to the restaurant to pick up the food. Then you drop the food off with the customer, rinse and repeat. It's pretty much that way. Now, everybody's got different ways of providing the information. They've got different ways of, sometimes some get into doing scheduling and others you can just log in and log out. Each platform has different nuances. There's good and bad about each. And I do have, I'll put a link in the show notes, it's a little deeper comparison of the different delivery programs as a whole. So you can check out that link in the show notes, or you can go to episode 47 in the Deliver on Your Business podcast. But again, I think that there is a difference between which is the best program or which is the best platform to do most of your work with, as opposed to which is the best one to get started. In the end, though, I think the basics of it are pretty much the same. And once you get started with one, you get a feel for what, if you're going to really like doing one, there's a much better chance you're going to like doing the others. If you really hate it with one, it's pretty likely you're going to hate it with the others. So I think that's an important thing to understand when we're talking about that. Now, which one is the best one to start with? I should save this part for the end because then maybe you'll wait for it, right? Isn't that the way you're supposed to do it? Is just kind of build it up, and then announce my decision at the end. And that way you stay with me longer. I'm just going to get right down to it. Here's who I recommend. I think Ubereats is the best option to start. I really think that if you're going to get started with deliveries, the best one to start with is Ubereats. Doesn't mean it's the best one to do all the time, but I think for starting it is. And it's not even close, really. Because the issue here isn't so much who's the best platform to deliver for. It's who's the best one to dip your toe in the water with. Who's the best one to get a feel for it? Who's the best one to try and evaluate, do you really enjoy this delivery thing or do you really hate doing this delivery thing? And so I think you want to do it with probably the least level of commitment that you need. And I think that Ubereats is the one. And there's one reason for that, and it's called insurance. So what's so different about insurance with Ubereats that makes them so much better than anybody else? Here's the thing. If you listen to me much, I've had a couple of episodes on this and a number of articles on this, but one thing you've got to understand, you just have to understand when you do delivery, there is a high probability that your insurance company is not going to cover you if you're in an accident while doing delivery. Listen to that again. I'll repeat it. There is a high probability that your car insurance company will not cover you if you're in an accident while you are doing deliveries or even while you're logged onto a delivery app. Most personal insurance policies, they've got an exclusion in there that says that they're not going to cover you. Most of the time they use the term livery. There's other times they might use terminology about commercial insurance, but livery, I'm not sure how that's supposed to be pronounced. I think it's livery. That is a term for transporting goods or passengers for hire. And so it's not just people, but it's delivering things and being paid for it. If you're doing that and you're in an accident, your insurance policy probably says we're not going to cover you for that. And that's a big problem. If you're going out doing delivery, you're not insured, and that's a big problem. And I'll have some links also in the show notes about articles that go into more depth about that. But that's something that you've got to be aware of. That is one of the most important things that I think too many people are not aware of when they start doing delivery. And that's where Ubereats comes in, because they are the only one of the 4 major food delivery companies that provide actual car insurance for you when you're delivering. The only one. Now, Ubereats it's a $1 million commercial auto liability coverage per covered incident. And actually, it is an actual policy. And if you dig into sometimes on, the trip details and different things like that, on your Uber account, you'll find something about a way bill. And basically, it's an insurance document. And every single trip you're on, it's like there's a policy that is created for that trip. Nobody else does any of that. But like I said, they've got their commercial auto liability coverage. They will also extend commercial or comprehensive and collision coverage on your vehicle from the moment you accept an order to the moment you drop it off. And that is all covered with a $1,000 deductible. And I'll have a link to their insurance explanation. And they're the only ones that do that, folks. Now, Grubhub doesn't provide any coverage. I do hear people talking about, well, Doordash and Postmates, they provide a commercial auto. They do not provide commercial auto. What those two companies do have, they do have a little bit of coverage, but what those companies have is it's kind of what they call extra liability. And really what it is it's kind of like a blanket liability policy. There's never any policy that is put in your name, so it's very different than how Uber handles things. And your vehicle and your injuries are not covered by their policies. It's liability only. What that means is if you cause damage and your insurance doesn't cover it, then their liability may kick in here. And it may. Because the problem is that they've got these clauses in there that you've got to have the proper insurance. They don't really go into definition of what the proper insurance is, but it still gives them an out. It gives them an ability to say, you know what, you didn't get the right insurance. You didn't get commercial insurance, or you didn't check with your insurance company to see if they would cover you. And since they don't cover you, we don't have to either. They could do that. So, and here's the other thing is DoorDash's policy is only in effect during the time you've got food in the car. Postmates, I think they say that they cover you between when you accept an order and when you drop it off. None of them will cover you when you're logged in, and your personal insurance won't cover you if you're logged in, but you're not on an order. So that's the big thing that really sets Ubereats apart. Now, there are still some gaps that you've got to be aware of, even with Ubereats. With car insurance, when it comes to doing either rideshare or delivery, they've got what are really called 4 stages. One is stage 0, and stage 0 basically means you're not logged in at all to do any deliveries, and that's when your personal car insurance is covering you. Stage 1 insurance, basically stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, you are not covered by your personal insurance unless you've got insurance that specifically, that does, like I said, most insurance policies don't. You want to check, see what yours has. But stage 1, 2, and 3 are generally not covered by personal insurance policies. Stage 1 is where you're logged in to deliver, but you haven't accepted any offers. This is the most dangerous one, folks, because this is the one that there's no coverage from anybody, not even liability. Your insurance isn't covering you. And even with Ubereats, this is the one difference. They do provide coverage for you, but it's liability only in stage 1. There's no coverage for your vehicle. So let's say if you're driving around, but you haven't accepted an order yet, but you are logged in and you get into an accident, damage to the other person is covered if it's your fault, but not to you if it's your fault. So there's still a little bit of a gap that you got to think about there. Stage two is when you accept an offer, you're on your way to pick it up, and Ubereats provides full coverage on that, including, the liability and everything like that. They've got a $1,000 deductible for damage that happens to your vehicle. And in stage two, Postmates does provide excess coverage, is what they call it, for liability during this stage. Doordash and Grubhub do not provide any kind of liability or anything. Stage three is when you've got food in the car and you're in the process of delivery. If you're in rideshare, that's when you got the passenger in the car and you're taking them wherever you're going. And again, Ubereats does their full coverage with the $1,000 deductible. Postmates and Doordash during stage three will cover excess liability, is what they call it. They've got it written so they can weasel out of it if they want to. And once again, Grubhub provides nothing. So you got to understand those different stages, and you got to understand that in most cases, just from your personal insurance, you're not going to be covered. And if you're not with Ubereats, you're not likely to be covered at all. And that is why I say, if you're going to get started, go with Ubereats. When you get started, because it gives you a chance where you're at least covered for the most part, but without having to necessarily make that commitment yet to making a change in your insurance. Your one gap there with Ubereats is that time when you're in stage one and you only have liability. That's when you're logged in, but you're not on an order yet. And really, you know what? If your car is paid off and you only have liability insurance, that's pretty much the same thing as what you've got right now anyway. So it's not like there's even a gap there. But if you do owe money on your vehicle and you want to use that for delivering, you do really want to think about even if that's worth the risk. Now, stuff that happens in stage one isn't going to happen very often, but it's always a possibility. And that's what insurance is all about, is that possibility, right? So you've also got to think, too, about whether that $1,000 deductible is an issue. And it kind of depends on what your current policy is. If you've got a policy where you've got maybe a $250 or $500 deductible, what that means is if something happens to your car, that first $1,000 is out of your pocket before the insurance kicks in. So there's a lot of things like that you do need to think about, even with Ubereats. But the bottom line is, here's the idea that I'm saying is, if you're going to do delivery of any kind very long, you really want to dive into what you have for insurance. But I think if you're just dipping your toe in the water and you want to figure it out, that's why I really recommend Ubereats, because they do provide that insurance while you're on deliveries and while you're on the way to deliveries. And they've got partial insurance when you're in between deliveries. So what this all boils down to is you've got some insurance when you're on with Ubereats that you don't with the others. And it's enough insurance for you to at least get a feel for, how do you like this? Is this something you enjoy doing? Is this something that you want to explore going a little further into? And then if you're ready to do that, if you're ready to dive in a little further, you want to keep doing this, that's when I think you start investigating your insurance and looking into different options. And it's only if you're really ready to go forward with that, then that, you start looking at, do you need to replace your insurance or something like that? There's a little more commitment involved then when you've got to do that. And so it's easier to do that without having to make that commitment first with Ubereats than it is with the other three. And that's why I really recommend them above anybody else. Now, the thing is, no matter what, you've got some people that they are going to make their start with Doordash, and you've got some people that they are going to make their start with Grubhub, and you got some people that'll make their start with Postmates. And in a lot of cases, a lot of times people are looking at it like, this is the one I'm going to do, and you're kind of committing to one. If you listen to me much, I really recommend that you get involved with as many of them as possible so that you can kind of understand the pros and the cons of each one. But if you're really not sure you want to start with Ubereats, or maybe if you feel like if you know that your insurance does cover you on deliveries, you've checked into it, you feel good about that. If your insurance already covers you, some policies do. And if that's the case, then you've kind of leveled the playing field between everybody. I think there is, and let's just talk about the pros and cons of doing each of these companies as maybe your first one. Let's start with Ubereats, since we already talked about that. And we already talked about insurance, so I'm not going to beat that horse any further. But another factor that I think really weighs in favor of Ubereats, I think even without that thing about insurance, I would still lean towards Ubereats. And a lot of it is because they're just easy to work with. You don't have to mess with any kind of scheduling or any kind of time blocks. All you got to do is you just push a button that you're going to log in, and then you push a button that you're done. And it's it. You know, you log in when you want to start and you log out when you want to stop. You go on whenever you want to go on and you go off whenever you want to go off, and you don't have to worry about any of that other stuff. And I think it's just easier that way. Now, there was a time Ubereats didn't provide as much information about where your delivery is going now, but they've really improved in that area. One thing about Ubereats when starting up is sometimes they'll have some sign-up bonuses, but I'm not sure it's really a factor, because usually the ones that I've seen that they give, the bonuses happen. A lot of these companies will have a referral program. And in the show notes, I'll even have my referral link that, kind of depending on the time and your market and how badly they need drivers where you are, Ubereats and Doordash and Postmates will pay out referrals if somebody signs up off of your referral link. And so if you're thinking of getting started, I mean, I'll go ahead and put my link up there. I won't complain if you're doing that. Right now, they're not paying out much, if anything. There's a lot of places where they're not paying anything out at all. But, you know, the other thing that they do is some of them will also have a guarantee for the drivers, or they'll have some kind of a bonus for the drivers. And this is not such a strength really for Ubereats. A lot of people will tell you, well, you've got to get onto a referral link or something like that. But like the latest one I saw was like, you got to do so many, I think it's like 60 deliveries in 2 months, and you get a guaranteed $200. Wow. Here's the deal, folks. You know, it's like a $3 minimum on deliveries, and you're pretty sure to be that $200 if you've got that many deliveries. So it's not like they're giving you anything that you're not going to get already. So that's not as big of a thing in their favor or something like that. Every once in a while, you just got to pay attention to whatever the offer is whenever you click on a link, and they'll tell you whatever that is. And you know, sometimes something will be a little bit better there for you. There's a couple of drawbacks with Ubereats. You know, maybe the biggest one, I think, for people that are just getting started is Ubereats is the only one that doesn't actually give you a delivery bag to use. They're the only ones that don't. You're kind of on your own. Now you can. I've got some bags for sale they're less than $10, so it's a good, inexpensive way to get off the ground. You know what? If you want something that you just need to get something right away, go over to Walmart. Go into the camping section, and they've got, it's Ozark Trail, and I think they call it the 50-can insulated cooler. And a lot of people like to use that. One, it's only like $5, and it gives you kind of everything that you need. The dimensions are maybe the closest to something that you can get real cheap that will do the job for you. I think they're not ideal. I think the bag is a little too narrow for my liking, but it's a nice, real low-cost way to get started with that. Ubereats, like I said, you know, the other thing with Ubereats, they're the only ones that I know of that's got like a maximum age for their vehicle. They will not let you do deliveries on anything older than a 20-year-old car. And I think that's mostly related to the insurance that they provide. So they've got, if they're providing insurance, whoever's underwriting for them is going to put a little bit of pressure on them, say, yeah, you got to make sure that the car is in good condition if we're going to cover you, right? So those are kind of the pros and cons. Let's look at Postmates real quick. I think as far as simplicity, Postmates is right up there. You log in, you log out, and it's that easy. They're not as complicated to work with as Grubhub or Doordash because of that. And Postmates does provide a bag. It's a canvas bag or a soft-sided bag similar to the one that I offer that I've got in the link in the show notes or at entrecourier.com/basic bag, all one word, basic bag. And sometimes Postmates will have, I think, some better promotions for getting started. I've seen some like, you click and you sign up and it'll tell you, that within 14 days you complete so many deliveries and we're going to guarantee $6 or $8 per delivery. And that's actually not that bad. A lot of people kind of scoff at that, but you got to understand that that's $6 or $8 before the tip. And so the tips are not part of that guarantee. So that means, you could be looking at more like about $10, $12 per delivery. And that's not a bad way to start, folks. It really isn't. Now, the biggest drawback to me with Postmates has more to do with some of their practices, because right now I don't deliver for them because of a couple of things that they do. And if you go into the comparison, you can get more into that. It's not really as heavily related to whether or not they're a good one to start with or whatever. Some people don't like Postmates as much because the customers tip after the fact. You don't know what you're getting on a delivery. And some people don't like that. I don't know that that's really a factor in whether you ought to start or not with them, because that's something that you just figure out. And usually in their promotions, you don't have to do as many deliveries to meet whatever that is. So it's a little lower commitment to get into that. You can try them out and you can be done a lot quicker. So those are just some thoughts there. Ultimately, in my market, I find they're not as consistent with their offers. They're a little slower, but I think that varies by market. Let's talk about Doordash a little bit. Doordash is a favorite for a lot of drivers, and because they're the market leader, they might be the busiest right now. They might be the most likely to keep you running. In fact, lately in my market, I think they're the ones that seem to have the most consistent offers, even during the slow times. A lot of times they're not very good paying offers, and that's kind of the flip side of Doordash. But Doordash also provides a soft-sided delivery bag. It's the same type of bag as what Postmates gives you. I think it's probably a little flimsier than some of the ones that are out there, but they provide a bag. And Doordash also provides like an accidental injury coverage program. If you're hurt on a delivery, that's probably one thing kind of in their favor. So they tend to be maybe a little bit busier. Sometimes Doordash can offer the better sign-up bonuses, although there's kind of a flip side to it, because a lot of times I've seen that it's like you've got to do 200 deliveries within 2 months of sign-up. Now, if you get to a point where you're getting 2 deliveries in an hour, which is pretty good actually for somebody just getting started, you're talking about 100 hours. And 100 hours in 2 months can be kind of stretching it unless you're trying to do this full time. And it takes maybe a little more commitment to Doordash to try and get whatever that incentive is that they're giving. So, it can be really good, sometimes not so good. And the thing is with Doordash usually is it's within 2 months after signing up, but you can't start delivering until they've sent you the bag and their little red card and they do a little onboarding process. So it could be 5 or 6 weeks that you've got left by the time you do all of that. And so, that's kind of a flip side. But I think with Doordash, you'll find that they're a little more complicated when it comes to the delivery process. They've got smaller zones in your region and you got to log into one of those. And sometimes you got to do some scheduling ahead of time. They've got a number of metrics that they track you on, like acceptance rate and your completion rate, customer ratings, on-time delivery rate, and even the number of people now who claim that they didn't get their food. And they will deactivate drivers on some of those things if you fall below certain levels. And I think that creates a certain amount of pressure that I'm going to tell you, I don't think these aren't things that really worry me. I don't have an issue with any of those levels on that. But part of it is because I've been doing delivery before I ever started on Doordash. And they're all things that I think are within reason. But I think sometimes maybe for getting started, I'm wondering if maybe that level of pressure isn't the best way to get started. One other company that you can do is Grubhub. And Grubhub has, and one thing I'll tell you in their favor, they give you the bags and they're the best delivery bags out there as far as what's given by the platforms. They're much more substantial. They've got, they're firmer, they're better insulated, a little more flexible, I think, for how you can use them. You can lay them both flat or you can stand them up tall. One's a smaller one, one's a larger one that could be used for pizzas and things like that. So I think, they get you off the ground a little bit better. Grubhub has been known for paying better. I think mostly because they're the best ones out of any of them that I've seen at encouraging tips. So a lot of people say they're the best ones to start with just for that reason. And they might not be wrong if not for the insurance problem. As of the time that I put this out, to my knowledge, they do not have any kind of referral program. So there's not much out there as far as incentives or anything like that. There's a drawback in that, okay, you can't really get anything as a bonus for starting up with them, but they haven't needed to do bonuses for the longest time. That may start changing. I don't know, but because they've been kind of falling down a little bit. But I think at the same time, maybe that can be a positive because there's not as much pressure. And the nice thing is you could sign up with Grubhub and you could just sign up with them right away. And there's a little less pressure about when you've got to get started. And there's a little less pressure about having to complete so many deliveries to try and meet that incentive. Now, Grubhub relies heavily on a scheduling system. You sign up for schedule blocks, and those are a little harder to get into right when you're getting started. You've got to kind of get yourself established for a week or two. But that can make things a little more complicated when you're getting started out. But in the end, they're not hard to figure out. I don't think they'd be a bad platform to start with. I do think that, for the 2 years that I've delivered, they've been far and away the ones that have paid the most for me. They're the ones that I've done far and away the most deliveries for. And they've been the most consistent earners, at least until recently. And I think Ubereats has kind of caught up in the last couple months for me. But those are kind of those different platforms in a nutshell. Kind of some final thoughts that I want to throw out there for you. I recommend that you sign up with any and all platforms that you can get signed up for. Get a feel for each one of them. And you're going to find things you really like that maybe don't bother me, or that I'm not so fond of. And you're going to find things that maybe bother you that don't bother me. You know what I'm saying? So your experience could be totally different with each one. Now, again, I just say that because of insurance and the ease of getting started, I do think the best place to start is Ubereats. And I've got links for Ubereats. I've got links for Doordash up on here that are referral links. And as I mentioned, they are referral. It's a referral program. So I might get a little bit of a fee or something if somebody signs up and they complete so many deliveries. They're not offering as much lately because so many people have been trying to sign up that they haven't needed to recruit nearly as much. I don't know if it'll stay that way. You might be listening to this in 6 months and they're really begging for drivers and the referral fees are really good. So I don't make my recommendations based on referral fees. If I were right now, I'd be recommending Instacart because they're paying out really good money for referrals. And I don't even emphasize Instacart because the delivery model where you have to go through shopping, to me, is not efficient. It might be a good fit for somebody else, but I'm not going to push something based on what they're going to pay me for it, But I really recommend, you get started with one, and I really recommend that you really focus on one for a little bit, get to know it, and then get started with the second one. But I think especially if you start out with Ubereats because of the insurance and everything like that, and you get a feeling, you say, hey, you know what? This isn't so bad. Now dig into your insurance. Take the 3-step process, and I'll link that article in the show notes, but take that 3-step process to kind of check your insurance. Find out if you've got the insurance. If you don't, can they add anything on to your insurance policy? If they can't, then find out what it's going to take to get a policy that will. And that may be the deal breaker for you. You say, yeah, I'm not going to do deliveries because it's just too big of a hassle to do it. I think it pays well enough to make it worth paying extra if you need to. Anyway, once you've kind of made sure that your insurance is going to be covering you, whatever you've got to do that, then that's when you dive into the others. And at this point, I would say, the first thing you want to do is sign up with Grubhub. They may not be hiring right away. They seem to be the ones most likely to have a wait list, but that's why I guess I get signed up. But the other thing is if you do Grubhub and you get on, you don't have a certain number that you got to get done within a certain period of time. And so you've got a little room if you do get taken on. That's why I say start with Grubhub so that you can get on the wait list as soon as possible. And then start evaluating the other ones and pay attention to what kind of incentives are offered. If somebody's offering an incentive through a referral program, go through that because usually there's a little bit of an extra bonus. Unless it's Ubereats, they don't give you a whole lot extra. It's probably not worth bothering with. Pick one, evaluate, and then once you get onto that second one, I think dive into it. Focus on that one as much as you got to focus on to meet whatever the incentive is, get your money, and then move on to the next one. And I really recommend you pick one, focus on it, and then move on to another one and just focus on that one. Because what you do then is you get to understand the nuances, you get to understand the things you like and don't like about each one. And then that's when you can start settling into the things that you want to really focus on more. So that's kind of my take on getting started and on choosing a platform to get started with. The biggest thing is just make sure that you're covered when you're out delivering. I'll put 2 more links in the show notes. One is things that are really good about getting started. And the other one is things that you got to make sure you understand before you start, because I think there's some drawbacks to doing this delivery. I think when you do all of these things, and especially when you start to understand insurance and things like that, that'll help you to know what way to get started. And then kind of go from there. And then just hang out with this podcast and with the website, and I'll keep doing what I can to help you along. And if you got questions on any of this, always shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you. Folks, that kind of wraps it up for this episode, and I want to wish you the best through the rest of this week. You probably won't see much else going on the website right now because I'm heading out of town. But in the meantime, folks, the one thing that I really want to ask you to do is take control of what you're doing. Whether you're just getting started, whether you've been doing this for a while, you're an independent contractor. That means you're running a business. That means you're the boss. That means you're the one that gets to make the decisions. You get to choose what you're doing. Grasp that, embrace it, take control, and be the boss.